city of Hamilton, the traditional territories of the Erie, the Nutra, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. And again, it is such a wonderful morning, and we're happy to be here. My name is Siobhan Vipond, and I am the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress. And we're here because we want to talk about how this pandemic has really put the spotlight on the inequality in our society. This has been a really hard time for everyone, but it has been particularly hard for many in our society. The CERB, which was set up because it became very clear that employment insurance was not going to do what it needed to do during the pandemic, but it was only set up because the EI system was shorting us out. And the reality is that we need a pandemic. So that is an imperative. This pandemic has also made it clear that no one should have to go to work sick. And quite honestly, we don't want people to go to work sick. And the only way we're going to make that happen is if we have paid sick days in every jurisdiction in Canada. And this Labor Day, it is particularly important that we acknowledge those people who have made it so we could get our food at the grocery stores, that we could get food at restaurants, that we're at the farm fields to make sure there was food to be had, and that there was also, we could go to gas stations, we go to pharmacies. But also we need to acknowledge that for too many of those people, they are paid a minimum wage. And that minimum wage needs to closer reflect the work that they do and the importance they have in our society. So it is my pleasure to say that Jagmeet and the NDP have a plan to make better these situations. And so let me introduce a friend to working people across this country, Jagmeet Singh.
Hey, thank you so much, Siobhan. Thank you for everyone who's here today. Thank you for all my friends behind me. You're amazing. First of all, happy Labor Day, everybody. I think it's such an important and fitting day to talk about our plan for workers. We've released our plan and we've got lots of different elements, but I want to highlight two parts of that plan. Siobhan touched on one of them, and it's paid sick leave. In this pandemic, what's been exposed are a lot of the gaps in our system. Problems that have always been there, but were exposed and highlighted by this pandemic. And one of the biggest gaps was when times were tough and people got sick, they could not stay at home because they simply couldn't afford to. For a family that's just making ends meet, they can't afford to miss a day of work. If a worker has to choose between going into work sick or staying at home and not having any pay, it is an impossible choice to make. It is simply impossible. And so we said at the beginning of this pandemic, we needed to make sure workers had a paid sick leave. And so we fought hard to bring that in. And after months and months of fighting, we brought in a paid sick leave that wasn't working. And so for 22 times in this pandemic, over this past 18 months, 22 times in Parliament, I stood up and said, we need better access to paid sick leave. We need paid sick leave and it needs to work. 22 times Justin Trudeau said no. 22 times he rejected this most important step to keeping people safe. One of the most important steps that public health experts agreed would have saved lives and can still save lives. And despite demanding this so many times, Mr. Trudeau said no, only to say in this campaign that he's promising to get it done. That is the height of cynical politics, to deny something 22 times when it was needed most, and then to promise it in the middle of a campaign. That is cynical politics, and that shows entirely that Mr. Trudeau is all for show. Would love to campaign on things because the Liberal strategy has always been, why deliver it when you can just campaign on it? And we've seen that happen, and that hurts you. That hurts people. It hurt people that Mr. Trudeau did not bring in paid sick leave and did not improve access all those times we demanded it. So we want you to know, you can count on us. We believe in this. We believe in lifting up workers. We believe in putting in place 10 federally regulated paid sick days. On top of that, working with provinces and territories to establish a paid sick leave program in every single province and territory for all workers. No one, again, should ever have to worry about going into work sick or not having enough pay at the end of the month. We will fix this. Here, here. And the second thing I want to touch on today is the importance of childcare. We've known from before the pandemic that people were making, again, that incredibly difficult choice of, do I take a job or do I and have to pay for such expensive childcare, or do I give up on my career, on my future work, and stay at home and take care of the kids? That is a choice that women have had to make before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse since the pandemic. It's been harder to find childcare. It's incredibly expensive. The average cost for many provinces and territories, at least $20,000 a year for a child. That is incredibly expensive and such a huge burden. We know that women were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and so our response coming out of this pandemic has to acknowledge those who've been hardest hit. And that's why we are so committed to making sure everyone in this country has access to universal, affordable, accessible childcare, and we will continue to fight for that. That is a worker's right, that is something that will help women, and that will build a better society. So our plan outlines a number of ways how we're going to help workers, how we're going to continue to stand up for workers. I want you to know you can count on New Democrats to fight for you, to stand up for you. Here in Hamilton, we've got some incredible candidates. Just want to shout them out real quick. We got Lauren, who's right beside me. We got Matthew. We got Nick. We got Roberto. And I think that's all. And we got Malcolm. This is our team here in Hamilton and the surrounding region. You can count on New Democrats to stand up for you, to fight for workers, to fight for everyday folks. That's who we are. That's what we'll continue to do. Donc, un grand merci, mes amis. Aujourd'hui, on va parler des droits des travailleurs, droits du travailleur, et on a un plan qu'on a lancé pour montrer comment on peut défendre les droits des travailleurs et travailleuses. Et aujourd'hui, je veux parler de deux enjeux. Premièrement, le congé des maladies payées. C'est essentiel, particulièrement dans ces pandémies, quand les gens tombent malades, qu'ils ont accès à un programme de congé des maladies payées. On a demandé plus 22 fois pendant ces 18 mois de la pandémie qu'on mette en œuvre un programme de congé des maladies qui fonctionne. Et 22-3, M. Trudeau a dit non. Il a dit non aux travailleurs. Il a dit non aux familles. Et c'est incroyablement dommage parce que le prix, c'était les gens ont perdu leur vie. C'était quelque chose que les experts en matière de santé publique ont dit. Clairement, on a besoin d'un programme de maladies payées. Et M. Trudeau a dit non. Mais pendant cette campagne électorale, elle a dit oui, on va le faire. C'est le haut niveau de cynisme de dire non pendant les 18 mois de la pandémie et de mettre en œuvre, de proposer un promis pendant une élection. C'est cynique et c'est la mauvaise chose à faire. Et le résultat, c'était le fait que les gens ont payé avec leur vie. Les gens ont perdu leur vie parce qu'on n'avait pas un programme de congé des maladies payées qui fonctionne. Donc, vous pouvez compter sur nous, les néo-démocrates, pour continuer de s'assurer que dans chaque province et territoire, on travaille ensemble pour réaliser un congé des maladies payées qui fonctionne. Deuxièmement, je vais parler de la garderie et l'importance d'avoir accès aux garderies. C'est vraiment un grand enjeu parce que les femmes étaient les plus frappées par la COVID-19 et donc, dans la relance, on doit les aider. Et un outil essentiel pour les aider, c'est la garderie, un système de garderie universel, accessible, public. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va réaliser ensemble. Merci encore. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for being here. And with that, I'm ready for your questions.
First question, we have Christian Dicté from CTV News.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. I want to get your thoughts on yesterday's comments on gun control from Aaron O'Toole and him changing his position on the assault weapons ban. The Liberals are making this a wedge issue. If you were to form government, what changes would you make to the Firearms Act?
The reason we want to make these changes, we've got to remember, is because Canadians have seen some serious and horrific massacres as a result of assault weapons. We think about the Polytechnic massacre in Quebec, in Montreal, the massacre at the Masjid in Quebec City, the killings in Nova Scotia. Canadians are still reeling with the horror of this violence. And one of the things we can do is make sure that those weapons that were used are not accessible, are not available, are not on the streets. And so the community that's been advocating for gun control has demanded a buyback program like what New Zealand did. Mr. Trudeau promised to do that, but then broke that promise, broke that commitment, and didn't bring in a buyback program to clearly outright ban these weapons. New Democrats believe in keeping people safe, keeping our community safe, and that means making sure we've got a program that actually works to keep these weapons off the streets.
And my follow-up is, you're announcing universal child care for $10 a day, a $20 federal minimum wage, and changes to EI to cover more people. This morning, you're announcing some similar promises to the Liberals. How can you differentiate yourself from these promises? And another quick question I want to squeeze in is, with regards to the $20 federal minimum wage, are you worried about smaller businesses being able to stay competitive?
The Liberals have had 6 years to do any one of these things. They haven't done it. I think that speaks for itself. On paid sick leave, we asked them to do something about it 22 times in Parliament, and he said no. And then, right in the middle of a campaign, makes a promise that he's going to bring in better paid sick leave. That, to me, is the height of cynicism. Like, why didn't he do it before? And if he truly wanted to do it, why didn't he do it instead of calling an election? The difference between me and Justin Trudeau is he is all for show. He likes to do things that get attention and a headline, but when the time comes to get it done, he doesn't. We believe in getting it done. We believe in making sure people are protected. For me, this is not for show. This is about making sure we lift up workers and we make sure no one ever in our country has to go into work sick ever again. That's what we're about, and that's what we'll make happen. And that's the choice that people have to make. Do you want another 4 years of Mr. Trudeau who says all these great things but never delivers on it, and you end up paying the price, the cost of people going into work because they can't access paid sick leave? Or do you choose to vote for New Democrats who will put you first, who will fight for you, and will bring in paid sick leave?
En français, s'il te plaît.
Donc, la grande différence entre moi et Justin Trudeau, c'est le fait qu'il veut montrer que ce sont ses valeurs, et il veut montrer beaucoup, mais ses belles paroles ne ressemblent pas à ses actions. Par rapport, si on parle de congé de maladie payé, on a demandé un changement depuis 18 mois, 22 fois, et il a dit non chaque fois. Et maintenant, dans une élection, il dit « Oh oui, on va le faire ». Comment les gens peuvent croire dans quelqu'un qui donne des belles paroles pendant le temps difficile, mais il ne livre pas la marchandise. Donc les gens ne peuvent pas croire en Justin Trudeau. Et ça, c'est pourquoi j'encourage les gens, si vous voulez voir une différence, vous devez voter. Et vous devez voter pour l'NPD si vous voulez voir un programme de congé de maladie payée qui fonctionne.
Prochaine question, Sébastien Desrosiers, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Vous promettez des services de garde à 10 $. Vous savez que le gouvernement libéral, évidemment, a conclu une entente de 6 milliards de dollars avec le gouvernement du Québec, une somme qui lui serait transférée sans condition. Est-ce que vous vous engagez à honorer cette entente-là, donc à transférer au gouvernement du Québec 6 milliards de dollars sans condition?
C'était toujours nos valeurs que Québec a le droit de retraite avec pleine compensation pour tous les programmes fédéraux, et c'est nos valeurs, donc on appuie ça absolument, et on va appuyer l'entente. Mais je veux souligner comment M. Trudeau et son parti ont promis depuis presque 30 ans de faire quelque chose pour le système de garderie. Je reconnais comment le Québec a été avant-gardiste, mais ils ont eu besoin de l'aide parce que c'est toujours difficile au Québec de trouver un espace, trouver accès aux garderies. Donc, même le fait qu'on a un système incroyable au Québec, et on a besoin de plus de financement. Donc, pour 30 ans, les gens au Québec ont souffert. On va changer ça, on va agir tout de suite pour aider les gens, pas donner une promesse et puis le réaliser 30 ans après. On va la faire tout de suite pour aider les gens maintenant.
Et puis, hier, M. Trudeau était en campagne en Ontario. Des manifestants se sont présentés à certains de ces événements, encore une fois. Ça vous est arrivé aussi, par exemple, à Montréal, où un de ces manifestants vous a abordé. À quel point c'est une préoccupation pour vous? Est-ce que vous êtes inquiet de votre sécurité dans des événements comme ceux-là?
Oui, on a reçu des menaces, on continue de recevoir des menaces, et c'est un problème. Souvent, mon équipe me rappelle que si je réponds à cette question par rapport à moi, non, je n'ai pas des inquiétudes, mais j'ai des inquiétudes pour mon équipe. J'ai des inquiétudes pour les gens qui travaillent avec nous. J'ai des inquiétudes pour mes bénévoles. Donc oui, j'ai des graves inquiétudes. Et je veux souligner encore que les manifestations sont complètement, pas seulement d'accord, c'est acceptable, c'est important, c'est une partie de notre démocratie. Mais quand les manifestants montrent des messages haineux, violents, misogynistes, racistes, ce n'est pas acceptable, pas du tout. Vous pouvez manifester, vous devez, c'est votre droit, mais vous ne pouvez pas menacer les gens avec des propos haineux, violents, racistes ou misogynistes. Ce n'est pas acceptable, pas du tout.
In English, please.
My team has often asked me to remind myself, if I answer the question, do I feel safe? Of course I feel safe. If it's about me, I'm not worried about myself. But I am worried about my team. I'm worried about my volunteers. I'm worried about the people that come to events. And so I don't want any of the folks around me and the folks that want to participate in democracy to feel any threats of violence. And so while people can protest, not only is it something that we say is okay, we support it. People should protest. But when the protests are violent or have messages that are violent or racist or misogynistic or hateful, then it's completely not allowed. That is not welcome. That is not a part of our democracy, and it is wrong. People should be able to protest, express their opinion, be passionate about it, but you can't threaten people with violence, no matter which political party. You can't threaten people with misogyny and racism. That is not on. That is not allowed. Particularly, we've seen a lot of violence directed towards our healthcare workers and barriers put in place for healthcare workers trying to get to work, trying to save lives, cancer patients trying to receive their treatment. That is completely wrong, and that's why we put forward our proposal to make it an aggravating part of a sentence when someone is in any way violently protesting against or threatening a healthcare worker on the way to their job, doing their work. That is just not on.
Next question, David Thurton, CBC News.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Singh, and good morning to the people of Hamilton. Thanks for having us here. I just wanted to go back to your comment about the Liberals breaking their promise on the gun buyback program. They've proposed legislation to make this happen, and it's still in their platform. So is it fair to say that they've broken their promise on this issue? I mean, these things take time. And can you say whether or not you would make this buyback program mandatory?
What the community been asking for is a ban, a real ban on these assault weapons. And they laid out that a real ban would include mandatorily buying back these guns so that they're no longer on the streets, that making sure that it actually happens. And we point to New Zealand having done that. In fact, New Zealand, right after Christchurch, where a horrible massacre happened, immediately responded and then acted and got those weapons off the streets. Justin Trudeau has had years to respond, had been in power for 6 years, and hasn't done anything concrete in those 6 years. And at the end of his mandate, well, it didn't have to be the end of his mandate, he decided to call this election. So right before he decided to call an election, he put forward some legislation. Again, does that seem like the actions of someone who really believes in what they're doing? Does that sound like someone who really wants to get it done when they put forward legislation just months before they call an election? If he really wanted to get it done, I want to remind folks, for any of the things he promises, he had 2 more years on his mandate. And we have shown, if it's anything to help people out, to respond to people's needs, we have been there to force those things to happen. So there's no excuse. If he wanted to get anything done to help people, he could have continued to do it. The reason we're in this election is because he didn't want to help people more, he just wants a majority so he can help people less. And the choice is yours. You can vote for another 4 years of Justin Trudeau, who's going to do the same thing again and again, and make these great promises in the campaign, and then not deliver on them, and it's going to mean that people are going to hurt. With paid sick leave, it means that people are not going to be able to go stay at home when they're sick. Or you can choose New Democrats who will get this done, who have your back, who are fighting for you every step of the way.
Okay, I'm still not clear whether an NDP government would make this buyback program mandatory. So if you wouldn't mind just clarifying that, because you're saying that people have pointed to making it mandatory. People have said that it needs to be mandatory, but just let us know, let voters know if the NDP would make it mandatory. And I want to ask you this question. Sorry for double barreling it. I haven't heard anything from you on this Labor Day about workers who work from home. That's a real concern for many Canadians. The way we work has changed. Some people are concerned about having to go back to the office because of various reasons. And also, there are some companies that are saying that, you know what, if you decide to work from home, you're going to have to take a pay cut. What are New Democrats going to saying about that?
We'll start with the second part of it. We absolutely reject this notion that if workers work from home, then they should take a pay cut. That is not what we're about. We believe workers should be supported and should have fair rights. And to cut someone's pay because of their safety, because of working from home, is not something that we would support. We want to make sure workers are always protected, and working from home has become a reality for a lot of people in this pandemic. And so we want to make sure that they have the same rights and the same protections in place. It shouldn't matter where you work. If you are an employee, you are entitled to protections and supports, and we want to make sure that those workers get that help. In terms of your first question, I mentioned what the community is asking for, because that's what we want to see happen. We want to see that people are safe and that we follow New Zealand's example. It's been done before. We can make that happen, and the goal is to get weapons off the street and do it in the way that will actually get them off the street. So that's what New Zealand did. They actually made it mandatory with the buyback program. That's what I think makes a lot of sense.
Next question, Alex
That's what I'm saying.
Ballingall, Toronto Star.
Thanks very much. On childcare, the Liberals are promising, how's it going, to cut fees in half next year, and then their timeline to get to $10 a day is, I think, 2026. Would you guys do that faster, or would you keep those timelines? What would your timeline be for that program?
Again, I want to put this out to folks. You know, Liberals have been promising childcare for 30 years, 3 decades. Kids that needed childcare have grown up and have kids of their own, and there's still no childcare. And now they're promising, and they've signed some deals, and that's good. And I want to shout out all the advocates for childcare, all the early childhood educators who've been pushing for this. As you know, it's your victory. You fought hard and you made this happen. But the big problem is that Liberals can promise whatever they want. They can put out any plans they want. We know what they do. This applies to any question around the promises that Liberals make. They promised one highlight of their 2019 election promise, just to give you an example of why I have a lot of doubts if they'll actually do any of this. They promised pharmacare. It was one of their hallmark promises in 2019. It was such a big promise that they included it in their throne speech. And they said, yes, we're going to move forward on universal pharmacare. And in this platform that they talk about being costed, there is no money in it for pharmacare. So officially, that promise they made a big deal about just 2 years ago, just they campaigned on it, is completely gone now. They've abandoned that promise. So for anything that they talk about, how can people believe them now? What makes people believe them if they've been in power for 6 years and didn't do it? They had 2 more years on their mandate and didn't do it. They promised pharmacare, made it a big deal, and then completely abandoned it just 2 years later, as if people would not remember. I just don't think people believe them, nor should they believe them.
I understand, you're saying that people shouldn't believe them, but they're offering this timeline to voters in this election. So what would you say to voters who childcare is their issue? They see the Liberals saying $10 a day by 2026. What's the NDP promising?
If you truly want universal childcare, if that is something that matters to you, vote New Democrat. We'll get it done. You can't believe in Liberals who promise something and drag it out. They love this strategy. That's their favorite strategy. Why get something done when you can just campaign on it? They're not going to get it done because they want to campaign it on the next election as well. They're not going to get it done now because then what are they going to campaign on for the next 30 years? You can't believe them. And that doesn't give me any pleasure to say this. I think I would love to see this actually happen. But if you want it to happen, you do have a choice. Vote New Democrat, and we will do everything in our power to make sure universal childcare is achieved, and we will fight hard to make sure it's done. We're about the results. We want to get it done. We're not going to, as Justin Trudeau has said, already ruled out any option of getting it done in any other format other than in a majority. We believe very firmly in getting this done. We want to form government, but more important than forming government, we want to get this done so that people have access to childcare. That's our goal.
Next question, Kevin Warner, Hamilton Community News.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I understand you want to form government, but when you don't, or if you don't, how will you make the child care and the wage subsidies work with the other governments, with the other parties?
We're going to fight for it. Like, we can show what we did in this pandemic. Every step of the way, we fought to get more help to people. We believed in making sure people were able to make ends meet when they lost their jobs, so we fought hard and we doubled serve. We wanted to keep people in their place of employment. We wanted to make sure people kept their jobs, so we fought hard and increased the wage subsidy. The Liberals started at 10%, we increased it to 75%. We're about results, and so we want folks to know our team is committed to making childcare a reality. We're going to fight hard to make sure people have access to it. We believe in universal access to medication coverage for all. We're going to fight hard to bring in pharmacare. We believe in investing in our healthcare system. We're going to make that happen. So for anything, if you care about healthcare, if you care about childcare, New Democrats are your allies. We've got your back. We're going to make it happen.
And in Hamilton, one of the things about this election, people are saying nothing's being really talked about poverty. Hamilton has a significant poverty issue. How will you deal with the poverty issue, especially in Hamilton? And also, will it be? Are you supporting Argos or Ticats?
I was nervous with that question. The last one, I knew it might happen, and we were thinking about how to respond to it. And I said, I don't know what to do.
Argos suck.
And so that I knew might happen too. So I think it's fair to say, in Hamilton, I cannot answer that question right now. I hope the best team wins, and I hope folks have a good time today when they're watching the game. Is it happening right now? Soon. When they watch the game, I hope they have a good time. That's what I hope for sure. On the more serious question, though, sir, on poverty, it is something that we are seeing. As Siobhan mentioned, inequality is growing, and it's getting harder and harder for folks. Folks that were just kind of on the margins are feeling really squeezed. The cost of living is going up. And a lot of people are struggling with inequality, they're struggling with paying the bills, and we have a lot of people struggling with poverty. We know one of the most expensive costs in people's lives right now is housing. And to help people out of poverty, we need to make sure there's affordable homes, that people can find a place to call home, that they're subsidized and assisted living. People need a place. You know, if you want to start your life, if you want to find a job, if you want to build anything and get out of poverty, it is so incredibly impossible if there's not a place to live. So housing and our tackling the housing problem, I think, is going to be one key step to tackling poverty. We're proposing some guaranteed income, specifically for seniors that are living in poverty and for people living with disabilities. We think that's a good place to start to make sure we support people. We know that there are a lot of costs and healthcare costs that are creating barriers for people. A lot of people I've spoken to can't get their teeth fixed because they've got no coverage, and a lot of people can't afford the medication they need to stay healthy. So our approach to poverty is going to be to acknowledge that this is a problem that requires lots of different solutions. It means investing in housing. It means making sure people have got income supports. It means making sure we invest and expand in our healthcare system. We need to look at it as a broad problem, and not one single thing is going to fix it, but all these things together will certainly make a big difference in people's lives.
Next question, Ian Bickis, Canadian Press.
Thanks for taking my question. You talk about the federal increasing the federal minimum wage, but that leaves a lot of workers behind on the provincial side. Would you try and push provinces to increase the minimum wage as well, and how would you work with the provinces to try and achieve that?
I appreciate the question. So at the federal level, we can show leadership. And the federal minimum wage is a place to show leadership in terms of what should be happening. People who work any job in this country full-time should be able to live with dignity and respect. And right now, that's not the case. In fact, some of the most important workers, the workers that kept us going when everything was locked down, these are the workers that provided food, that provided services, that brought our goods to us, that worked in warehouses and factories, and worked in logistics. These workers were amongst the most important and are often the least paid. And so one of the ways that we can deal with this is to show leadership at the federal level, and we would encourage provinces. Of course, it's not in our jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean we can't show leadership. That doesn't mean we can't encourage moving forward with better wages, and that doesn't mean we can't show leadership by showing the way forward, and that's what we want to do.
And in terms of increasing the minimum wage, there are a lot of businesses that are struggling, especially ones that have been forced to close. How would this extra pressure, how would they be able to deal with this? Or how worried are you about putting pressure on businesses that are trying to recover from this hard time?
Well, it's important to look at which businesses are struggling and which businesses are doing really well. The big box stores, the large corporations certainly aren't struggling. They did really well in this pandemic, and many of them made profits, and some of them made record profits. So we're not worried about them. They've done really well. In fact, the system has been rigged in their favor, and that's a problem. But for the small businesses, we want to provide some supports. So we laid out our plan for small business, which would include putting a cap on credit card fees, which right now can fluctuate and vary and are one of the fixed costs that businesses tell us are one of their biggest concerns in terms of affordability and being able to run a good business. So we put a cap on credit card fees. We have proposed continuing the rental subsidy and the wage subsidy for small businesses to help them get back on their feet. And we've also proposed an incentive to hiring and rehiring workers, which is to cover the employment insurance and incentivize with additional supports in hiring and rehiring workers. So we would provide that support for small businesses, acknowledging they've been hard hit, and make the big box stores pay their fair share, which many of them haven't. Many of them have used offshore tax havens. Many of them took public money and paid out dividends to their shareholders. So we'd make sure they paid their fair share so that we could invest in small businesses.
Next question, Jason Gadola from CHCH.
Hi, Mr. Singh. What did you see in Hamilton when you decided to make your announcement here with about the paid sick leave? What did you see in it to choose this locale for that announcement?
This is a worker city, a city that's a proud tradition of workers, and I couldn't think of a better place in a worker city on Labor Day to talk about some of our plan to make things better for workers. And one of the most important things, given that we're still dealing with this pandemic, we're coming out of it, is paid sick leave. Like, it should not be a luxury. It shouldn't be a gamble that you've got the right job, that has the right benefits, it gets you paid sick leave. We want to make sure that no one ever again in our country goes to work sick. And there is no way that we can achieve that unless people aren't stuck with worrying, if I stay at home and I don't have paid sick leave, that means I'm not going to be able to make my bills at the end of the month. That choice should not be impossible. It should be easy, and it should be achieved by building a system that's got paid sick leave. Oh, that's it.
Next question, we will go on Zoom. Prochaine question, Ray Filion de TVA.
Oui, merci. Bonjour, M. Singh. J'aimerais vous entendre sur la volte-face de M. O'Toole par rapport au contrôle des armes à feu. Est-ce que vous êtes rassuré qu'il se soit ravisé et qu'il a annoncé hier qu'il va maintenir le décret de 2020 qui interdit environ 1500 armes?
Je pense que c'était une bonne décision, mais je veux aussi souligner comment M. Trudeau a aussi changé sa position. Il a promis d'avoir une interdiction complète pour ces armes d'assaut. Et ce qu'il a fait, ce n'est pas ce qu'il a promis de faire. On veut protéger la population. On sait qu'on a toujours les blessures et la douleur causées par les massacres, qui étaient les massacres où les gens ont utilisé ces sortes d'armes d'assaut. Donc, ce qu'on veut faire, c'est vraiment interdiction pour protéger la population. On veut écouter les gens qui ont demandé ça et on peut le réaliser.
Et vous avez dit à mon collègue tout à l'heure que vous avez reçu des menaces, vous et votre équipe. Est-ce que vous pouvez être plus précis là-dessus? Et aussi, est-ce que vous avez accru, est-ce que la sécurité autour de vous et votre campagne a été accrue?
Notre sécurité est excellente et je veux remercier l'équipe de sécurité qui nous aide et qui nous garde en sécurité. Ils font un travail excellent. Mais on peut partager les détails. Notre équipe va faire un suivi pour partager les détails. Mais je veux encore rajouter que les gens peuvent manifester. C'est complètement d'accord et c'est un important élément de notre démocratie. Mais ce qui n'est pas acceptable, c'est les menaces violentes, la misogynie, le racisme, les propos haineux. Ce n'est pas acceptable.
Prochaine question, Boris Proulx avec Le Devoir.
Bonjour, M. Singh. Merci beaucoup de prendre ma question. Sur l'annonce du jour, j'aimerais savoir si vous pouviez me partager les détails de comment Jagmeet Singh, premier ministre, fonctionnerait avec les provinces. Certaines d'entre elles ont déjà des jours de congé payés, si je comprends bien. Est-ce que vous leur proposeriez de l'argent? Comment ça fonctionne?
Oui, merci pour la question. Donc, premièrement, ce qu'on propose, on propose 3 choses, effectivement. Premièrement, pour les travailleurs au niveau fédéral, on va tout de suite mettre en place une loi qui dit qu'on doit avoir 10 journées de congés de maladie payés pour les travailleurs au niveau fédéral. On peut le faire tout de suite. Deuxièmement, dans ce temps, avant qu'on puisse mettre en œuvre des programmes provinciaux et territoires, on encore exige, notre plan va d'avoir une congé de maladie payée au niveau fédéral qui fonctionne pendant qu'on est dans cette pandémie. Et pour notre plan, pour avoir un programme de congé de maladie payée permanent, ce qu'on veut faire, c'est de travailler ensemble avec les provinces. Et oui, ça veut dire qu'on peut travailler pour mettre notre partie d'argent, de financement pour les aider. Mais on veut montrer le leadership fédéral pour aider les provinces et territoires de réaliser un programme qui s'assure que personne jamais dans l'avenir doit faire une décision impossible entre rester chez eux ou aller au travail malade. On va régler ça et je pense qu'on peut réaliser ça en travaillant ensemble avec les provinces et territoires.
En guise de suivi, vous avez dit tout à l'heure que c'était toujours vos valeurs au NPD, que le Québec a droit à son retrait avec pleine compensation. Est-ce que ce serait le cas avec un programme de congé maladie payé de 10 jours, tout comme pour vos autres programmes comme l'assurance dentaire, l'assurance médicaments? Est-ce que le Québec aurait droit de se retirer avec pleine compensation pour tous ces programmes?
Oui.
Merci.
Je vous en prie.
Ceci conclut notre conférence de presse. Thank you, merci.
Merci. Merci tout le monde. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for the extra water.